This is called an American guarantee. Each person has the right to pursue opportunity, freedom, and the chance to live. We should welcome those who come to this country to do so with open arms. Currently, the way the U.S. treats immigrants is despicable and inhumane. No child deserves to be separated from their parents. No toddler should have to defend themselves in their own court case. No human being should be locked in a cage simply for crossing a man-made line in the sand. In 2016, Border Patrol apprehended approximately 408,870 immigrant crossers along the Mexican-American border. They detained nearly 360,000 and deported 255,000. In 2018, they separated at least 2,000 immigrant children from their parents. Border Patrol and activist organizations such as Colibri have found 2,832 immigrant corpses in the Sonora Desert since 2001, and at least 245 of the children separated in 2018 have yet to see their parents. There are individual stories as well. During my 10 days in San Antonio, I spoke to dozens of families who'd recently crossed the southern border, explaining the asylum process in Spanish to them and collecting their immigrant stories. One woman crossed the Rio Grande with her 2 sons and 4 other passengers in an inflatable boat. She counted herself among the lucky. Others have waded across with their children on their backs, the water rising up to their necks. Like her, most are too afraid to cross the border through official points of entry, fearing they'll be deported. This woman's fear of immigration officials was justified. When she finally turned herself in to seek asylum, I separated her and her oldest son for 2 days. He was crying the whole time, she told me. Another woman traveled with her husband from Cuba. When they presented themselves at the border, patrol agents sent the 2 of them to different detention facilities. Now, she doesn't know where he is. One of the guards catcalled me in the detention center, she told me. She is only 21 years old. A young man I spoke to was wearing the same clothes on his back that he had when we crossed the Rio Grande 4 months before. Border Patrol kept him in a cage-like holding cell, often called the kennel, for 10 days, then transferred him to a detention center where he stayed for 2 months. I spoke to him in his first hours of freedom. The center was awful, he said. I barely ate. For 2 months, I was really sick. How old do you think I am? He asked me later. My guess was 30. 20, he replied. On Tuesday morning, Michael, a co-volunteer, told me that he'd spoken to a woman whose leg had been cut off, likely by Honduran police. Her husband's face was covered with knife marks. They were grateful to be alive. They can't go home, I thought to myself. But if they are scheduled to present their asylum case in Georgia, a state in which 96% of asylum seekers are deported, then odds are they'll have to return. One story in particular haunts my conscience. A Honduran woman named Dilcia fled domestic violence and police brutality with her 11-year-old son, leaving her 3 younger children in Honduras with her sister. They journeyed by train across Central America. When the tracks could not go any further, they walked. For 10 days, she said, maybe more. Somewhere between Mexico and Texas, she paid a coyote $1,000 to guide her and her son through the mountains and desert that line the border. Instead, He kidnapped them, locking them in a secluded house. For days they were trapped in a single room, their legs tied together, their mouths taped shut. Somehow they escaped. At the edge of the Rio Grande, another coyote offered to transport them across the churning waters. With the feeling of duct tape still itchy on her mouth, Dilcia refused and resolved to swim across instead. But her legs and her arms were too weak, and so she and her son struggled back to the Mexican shore and journeyed through the mountains instead. "Thanks to God we are here and alive," she told me, her voice tear-stained. Others have not been so lucky. One wrinkle in fate and she could have been one of those 2,832 bodies, scattered along the southern border, buried by desert sand or river currents. One may wonder why immigrants trade their homes and gamble their lives to come to the U.S. For those like Dilcia, the answer is this: if they leave home, they could die. But if they stay home, they will. To asylum seekers, the United States promises the chance to live. Many who survive the journey, however, find that to be a false guarantee. Currently, 60% of asylum seekers are denied permanent residence and deported. That means within a year's time, Dilcia could be forced to return to her abusive husband in Honduras. The 20-year-old man I spoke to could be fleeing the drug cartel in Central America for the third time, and the couple that Michael met could be hiding from corrupt policemen. And I will have no way of knowing. Their stories, along with thousands of others, remain largely unheard, swept away by the desert wind, or locked behind the walls of detention centers. Much of what people know about the brutality along the border is heard through the grapevine. There are misconceptions and conflicting stories. There is misinformation and ignorance. 42% of Americans think that most immigrants who are living in the U.S. now are here illegally, when in reality most are here legally. An insider report finds 29% of Americans believe there is no issue at the border. 28% say the border is facing a security crisis rather than a humanitarian crisis. And 8% report they don't know whether there is a crisis or issues at the border at all. No amount of deportations will put an end to the violence in various Latin American countries. No wall will resurrect those who have died in detention or in the desert. But stories might. As U.S. Americans, we should listen to Dilcia's story and those of her fellow immigrants. We should share them and learn how we can make their lives better, whether that be through working with their home countries to restabilize their governments or making the path to asylum status and citizenship more accessible. If there's one thing I'm taking away from my time volunteering in San Antonio, it's that yes, I am American, but I am also a citizen of the world. It is my duty to not only protect and advocate for my fellow Americans, but also for my fellow inhabitants of planet Earth. And so, I will continue to tell Dilcia's story and fight for justice along the border, until all America hears her voice and is ready to join me. Until this country becomes a place where the right to live is not an American dream, but an American guarantee. Whether we are white or non-white, whether we speak English or Spanish, whether our ancestors came over on the Mayflower or we braved the Sonoran Desert not one generation ago. And I just want to mention that there was one day after I left the bus station where I was speaking with these people and writing down their stories. And my mom and I went to the Guadalupe River, which is a river near San Antonio. And I was sitting in the river and watching a dragonfly fly above the river and over the canyon. And I wrote this poem as a reflection of borders and dragonflies. So I'm going to read it to you now. It's called Racing After Dragonflies. I sit in the sands of the Guadalupe River, leaning back on my elbows, green water pouring over my legs. Gold-flecked currents swirl around my toes. I raise one hand to the surface, sifting silt with my fingers. To my left, a weathered canyon stretches towards the sky, kissing the horizon. A dragonfly lands on my knee. I reach out my hand, but it slips through my fingers before I can catch it. Funny how dragonflies can go wherever their wings will take them, following the whispers of the wind or skirting the ripples in the river. To a dragonfly, the earth is not defined by lines on a map or cut into jagged pieces by walls and oceans. The world is limitless. Raindrops tie daffodils to the sun, birdsong threads together midnight and dawn, gravity returns the moon to the sea, rivers carry pebbles to shore. A dragonfly knows no borders. They can follow the currents of the Guadalupe River downstream to North Texas, New Mexico, California, Colorado, or upstream past Nuevo Laredo, beyond Mexico City to Oaxaca, or Guatemala even. To dragonflies, borders are just mere lines in the sand. Even the river gets caught in the gates of this country, disrupted. But dragonflies are untetherable. Walls don't apply to them. Wow. Humans, like rivers, are not so lucky. If we had wings, we could float above the desert sands and river currents, the ice raids, cacophony of protests, and the ghosts of deported dreamers that still linger on U.S. soil. But alas, we are grounded, tied to the land and the walls we have built. We are reduced to our legs. But legs are not enough for Karen from Honduras, who traveled with her son as they approached the border between McAllen and Reynosa. They will not transport her through the mountains or over the fences, nor did they protect her from the coyote who locked her in a lonely room for 2 days, feet tied together and duct tape over her mouth, or the desert that tried to swallow her. Soon she will reach this river I sit in. She will consider giving in to the pull of the rapids, allowing them to carry her northward, away. But the river, she'll realize, will simply throw her into the wall. And then she will go no further. Then she'll spot the dragonfly on my knee. She'll whisper her sadness to its tiny ear. She'll watch it take flight, sailing above the canyon walls. Its wings will grow heavy with her broken dreams as it carries them all the way to U.S. America. And she'll think, I wish I were born a dragonfly, but alas it escapes, and I am still here. And so we race after dragonflies, chasing our freedom. But they are too fast, and we're only human. So we slip, lose our grip, and never quite catch them.